So I'm going to talk about investing with clarity, or I should be as modest as Sam saying, seeking to invest with clarity. But why are we talking about clarity? Well, let's face it, there's lots of noise out there. Every day we are bombarded by headlines. Some headlines may make you anxious, you want to pull out of the market. Some headlines may make you to chase the hottest trend, right, just to avoid FOMO. And in response to that, the financial industry has no shortage of incentive to provide you the latest products to capture the flavor of the week. Just in the thematic fund space, basically funds that seek to capitalize on a particular trend, be it AI or clean energy or digital transformation, you see there are tons of launches every single year, as shown in the teal bars, but also tons of closures every year, as shown in the gray bars. What this shows is that there is tons of commercial interest to launch whatever is hot to gather hot assets, but many of them turn out to be just investment fads, leaving investors utterly disappointed. And this could be the case even if you look at funds that have had a solid track record. If you just focus on funds that have had top quartile returns over the last 5 years, how many of them were able to continue that top quartile performance? On average, less than 1 in 4. And that is also less than random chance. So with so low signal-to-noise ratio in the financial industry, right, we need to ask, what are the things investors can do to tune out that noise so that you are not constantly being carried away by marketing stories or short-term performance? And for that, I would say, let's come back to the basics. Let's understand what drives returns, what drives differences in expected returns across different securities, and how can you use those insights to build portfolios for the long run. And let's start with very macro. Right? We've got a lot of discussions already talking about the real economy. Obviously, real economy matters for all of us. But how does it impact stock prices, asset prices? As you've already heard from previous panels, the relation is not as obvious as you may think. Let's start with some simple examples. 1980, the US started the year with a recession. Economic data was looking really grim. S&P 500 that year was up more than 30%. 2009, the recession caused by the global financial crisis was not over until later that year, but yet S&P 500 was up more than 25%. If those memories are too distant, I hope many of us still remember COVID, 2020. There was a sharp downturn in March, and there was plenty of uncertainty, and there's no end game in sight, yet the market was up 18%. It's not just these anecdotes. If I look at the data more systematically, across 20-plus developed markets over 40-plus years, what I'm charting here is the relation between equity premium in a country given year against its GDP growth in the same year. If you think the economic growth and equity returns should be positively related, those dots should follow somewhat an upward trend. What do you see? A cloud of points, which says that even if you have perfect foresight of economic growth of any given country, it may not be that useful for your investment decisions. So what is going on here? Am I saying that the market will keep going up every day regardless of what's going to happen in the economy? Absolutely not. Am I saying that the real economy doesn't matter for asset pricing? That's not the case either. In fact, because the real economy is so important, because all the things we're talking about, what the Fed is going to do, what are the implications of tariffs, what are thinking about the impact on the real economy and then individual countries, because those things are so important, people are paying attention to them, And the expectations of the future outcomes, the range of outcomes, and their impact on the economy and individual companies are constantly priced in current prices. So current prices are forward-looking, right? If anything, it's the market leading the economy, not the other way around. Which also means for investors why it is so difficult to pick winners and losers ahead of time, right? Even if you have a pretty good handle of the complex relation in the economy, even if your predictions turn out to be right, that's still not enough. Because what drives returns, drives prices, is the surprises that are relative to the expectations that are built into current market prices. So that's why whenever I talk to clients, I always say, well, of course, you should read the news, read the headlines to be an informed citizen, but don't use those to inform your asset allocation changes. And you will hear more from the panel after me about the US and then also going beyond the US. I always want to remind everyone that there is a global opportunity set out there, tens of thousands of companies that you can own at very competitive price. And the global market, now shown here with basically a global map, not by land size, but by the market capitalization of the stock markets, is huge. And you also have an equally huge fixed income market. And the global market really gives you a good starting point to think about this real-time snapshot of diversification, of risk-return trade-offs that investors are making in aggregate. And then with that starting point, you can think about how you might deviate from the global market. So that's point number one, about real economy and the stock market. Now let's go from macro to micro. What drives individual stock returns? For that, let's start with the biggest companies, because they usually get the most attention. And for that, the recent years, we're talking about the largest tech companies in the US. And of course, they have got the most attention because they have done really well. And here we have done a systematic analysis using more than almost 100 years of data, looking exactly at the largest companies. Here, the bar is showing what happens if you look backwards. Before those companies became the largest, their performance is great, right? 10, 20, 30 percentage point annualized output and over the market. That's exactly how they got here in the first place, how they became the largest companies. What about the performance after they became the largest companies? Not as magnificent. Flat to the market or even underperforming. So is it because that these companies, once they become the largest stocks, are no longer good companies? Well, in some cases, yes, disruptors get disrupted. But in many cases, they continue to be great companies with a solid business line that you want to buy product from or you want to work at. But the thing is that what drives the expected return of a stock is not just whether this is a good company or not. So the prospects of all the companies, right, their profitability, their future outcomes are constantly priced into today's market price. Just to give you a sense of that dynamic in the market, it's a very liquid, competitive market. Just global equities, we're looking at more than $800 billion changing hands on a daily basis on average. And through all of that trading between buyers and sellers, information gets into market prices very, very quickly. So what drives the returns of stocks is not just your assessment of the company, right? What really drives returns is the price you pay and the future cash flows that you expect to get through that investment. And that's really the basic valuation framework I'm showing here. And that's kind of finance 101, and I would say it's probably the closest to a physical law that we have in finance. Essentially, the price that you get to see real time every day is the discounted future cash flows. And that discount rate from our investors' perspective is our expected return. So what drives the expected return? The price you pay on the left-hand side, future cash flows on the right-hand side. So if you have ways to have information about the prices you're paying, the price variables, And then on the right-hand side, combined with cash flow related variables, that can help you systematically identify which stocks should have higher expected returns versus which stocks should have lower expected returns. That also explains then why some of the biggest companies, after they become bigger, don't really show much better performance afterwards. Well, because on expectation, these are already mega cap, growthy companies, right? Very high valuations. Their expected returns should be low based on the theory. And so this is where, in our research, where we spend the most of the time on, is to try to extract information from market prices and to look at what are the variables that reliably drive returns that we can build broadly diversified, low turnover portfolios around in order to pursue higher expected return, in order to outperform the market without trying to outguess market prices. Now we talked about what drives returns, what contribute to returns. Let's talk about costs, what detract from returns. And for that, I would say there has been a lot more progress made on having more clarity about what you are actually paying for a product. And I would give a lot of credit to investors as well, that there's now more awareness from investors that cost definitely matters. If you simply look at just the fees, the expense ratios of funds, and sort them from the highest to lowest, or in this case, lowest to highest, from left to right, you can see that the outperformance rate of funds steadily declines as you go from cheaper products to the more expensive ones. Not surprising, right? Costs are something you can control and eat into your net returns. But does that mean now what we need to do is simply sort everything by expense ratio and pick the cheapest option? Not so fast. Because fee is an important part of your cost, but there are many things that are contributing to the total cost of ownership. Just like if you were to buy a car, right? The price is what you can see very visible, the price tag. But you also need to think about maintenance costs, you need to think about fuel economy, and you also need to think what you are getting, what kind of car you're getting, what is the comfort and safety associated with that car. So what really drives the experience is not just the price and being the cheapest. And the same thing with investment. Expense ratio matters, but there's a lot of things that contribute to the total cost. The way that the portfolio is set up, the way the portfolio is managed, the trading costs, how consistent you're focusing on the goal of the portfolio, and then there's a lot of things that you can do also to contribute to returns, as we talked about earlier. Which means that in the end, you really need to have a holistic assessment of performance and holistic assessment of an investment strategy to understand better whether the outperformance can continue into the future and what really drives that performance. Now, what does all of that mean for you as an investor, right? Should you then go into active funds, or should you go buy just index funds, or what kind of funds should you buy? I would say, why not both? And based on a lot of things I said, you actually can have a systematic way to pursue higher expected returns, and that's what we call a systematic active approach or factor-based approach that's very much backed by the financial science and supported by rigorous research. And that type of approach will give you the best of both active investing and passive investing. So you will see that for our systematic investing strategies, they are very broadly diversified. We're talking about tens of thousands of stocks that you can own. And they are low turnover, low cost. But unlike index funds, they're not settling just for index returns. And they're not as rigid that you are leaving money on the table. So just like active, you have the ability to outperform. And importantly, you can use the flexibility in your favor by rebalancing, by making slight changes on an every day through that daily process to balance that trade-off between expected return, diversification, and cost. And this approach that we've been committed to for more than 40 years, and I think one that has served clients really, really well. Of course, I am obviously biased when it comes to using an evidence-based, research-supported approach for long-term investment, but I'm grateful to know that also Endowus, after years of their research and due diligence of all the funds out there, have decided to put dimensional type of strategies as more than 50% of their core flagship portfolio, and also 100% of the factor portfolios. And globally, we've got more than 900 billion USD of assets that are entrusted with us pursuing this type of approach. So if any of this, any bit of it sounds interesting to you, drop by our booth. We don't have any free goodies, but we've got a lot more to share. Thank you.